Welcome to the Environments and Survival Unit Internalization video. My name is Sean Tamarisk of KIPP, Massachusetts. And the big question for this unit is, what makes an organism more likely or less likely to survive in an environment? And we start with these lovely snails. They are our overarching phenomena for the unit. They are grove snails. There's two different varieties of grove snails. They're the same species, but they have different traits. One has a yellow shell and the other has a banded shell. And we're going to look at why the yellow-shelled snails aren't doing so well right now, and why the banded shell snails are surviving in much larger numbers than them. They live in this lovely habitat right next to the ocean. And as you can see, the yellow-shelled snails are declining in numbers over the years. So before we begin, make sure you've done these three things in the unit plan documents. This is an important foundational unit in preparation for learning more about Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection in middle school. Hashtag Wallace was first. And understanding family trees and how organisms are ultimately related and descended from the same common ancestors. There's also some important connections to climate change. For example, trying to understand how organisms survive or which organisms survive when an environment changes drastically, such as here with these trees who did not survive. Great book I just want to promote, The Sixth Extinction, about the current mass extinctions that are happening due to climate change. Goes into a lot of detail about why some organisms are able to survive and why some are not. It's a great read.
All right, on to the chapter overviews.
All right, big question number one is, how do we know if an organism will survive in a habitat? In order to answer that question, we dive into this activity where kids look at the needs that various animals have for survival and the habitats or environments that help those animals meet those needs, and try to understand and make predictions about whether an animal like this, a gopher, would survive in a tropical forest better or would survive in a grassland better. Students read the book Earthworms Underground to learn about all the different adaptations or physical traits that earthworms have that enable them to meet their needs in the environment of the soil. Students play a board game that serves as a useful model for understanding how survival works in a habitat, where they pretend to be red squirrels trying to find food and trying to avoid predators, as well as drinking water, and they then graph their survival data.
By this point, students should understand Progress Build 1. When it's easier for organisms to meet their needs in an environment, they're more likely to survive.
Once students have done these tasks, they're ready to answer the Progress Build 1 focus task, which returns to the question of the snails. Go ahead and read through the data carefully and then answer the questions on the handout. Make sure you watch the video as well of the song thrush bird linked in the handout. You'll notice you have a checklist or rubric to help you check your work with, as well as a word bank to use.
Go ahead and pause now.
Great, so for part A, you should have marked claim C as the most likely claim. The evidence to support that is provided in this exemplar explanation. Go ahead and read it over and compare it to your own.
And here's the multiple choice questions on the Progress Build 1 focus task. Go ahead and complete them now. Pausing now. And here's the answers. Go ahead and check them. Pausing now.
Now we're ready for big question number two. Why do some individuals survive in their habitat and others don't, even though they're the same species? So now we're starting to get into variation within a species and which variations of traits are helpful or adaptive and which are not helpful or not adaptive for surviving in the environment. Students use a model of ruby-throated hummingbirds. So they pretend to be hummingbirds with their pipettes and cups of water, and they dip the pipettes in water and try and take it out like birds, like hummingbirds take nectar out of flowers. They use this to identify which beak is best suited for certain flowers and graph that data. In the next lesson, they move on and read more about mystery mouths and how all these different types of and shapes of mouths are adapted or not for their environments. Next, they go on to study fossils and investigate individual fossil specimens to identify what a fossil can tell us about how an environment used to be based upon the adaptations that that animal or plant had to be able to live in that environment. Students also get into rock layers and understanding how fossils form, how they pile up over time, and how the fossils in top layers are always older than the fossils in the bottom layers. Next, they return to a board game. This time, they are a mouse, avoiding owls and trying to get food. After playing the game and collecting data, they graph it once again. Students also explore models of survival within an environment with animals of the same species that have slightly different traits, such as having thick fur or no fur, and being certain colors, and how that affects their likelihood of survival in an environment. Here's another example with long necks versus short necks, armor versus no armor.
And by this point in the unit, students should understand progress build 2. There can be adaptive and non-adaptive traits in a population to determine whether an organism survives.
And now it's back to our favorite friends, the snails. For Progress Build 2 focus task, we have a little bit more data, which will help us answer a more nuanced question. Why are the snails with banded shells more likely to survive than the snails with yellow shells? What is it about the environment or the traits of those snails that enables them to survive? Please read through the task carefully, look at the data, and complete it.
Go ahead and pause now. And here's the multiple choice questions. Go ahead and complete them, pausing now. And go ahead and check your answers, pausing now.
So for part A, you should have circled claims B and C, as both of these claims are supported by the data. And here are two different exemplar responses, one using evidence for claim B and one using evidence to support claim C. An exemplar response could also have both of these elements combined into a single response as well. Please go ahead and read it over. Moving on to big question number 3, what happens to organisms when the environment changes? We start exploring this by modeling marmot survival on glaciers. Marmot's natural predators are hawks and eagles. As you can see, here's our fun marmot friend right here. And here's the glacier habitat in which the marmots live. Marmots come in two flavors, white and black, for the purposes of our model. And students try and figure out which color marmot would do best on the glacier habitat. Spoiler alert, the ones that blend in, the white ones. They model the glacier with white paper. However, what happens when the glacier melts? They switch to black paper to model that, and they figure out that in this case, the white trait actually makes it harder for marmots to survive now that the environment has changed. So which trait is right for the environment can change if the environment itself changes. Students reinforce this concept by reading in the book Environmental News about various traits over the years and how those have changed. They model this with before and after pictures of an environment and various beak and foot structures that are either helpful for that environment or not, by deciding which birds are most likely to survive in each of these environments.
At this point, students should understand Progress Build 3. Which traits or adaptive traits can change when the environment changes? This can cause new traits to become important to survival.
And back to our favorite friends, the grove snails. Students are now ready for the Progress Build 3 focus task. They have additional data which will help them answer the question, why were snails with yellow shells more likely to survive in their environment 10 years ago? So noticing that yellow snails were doing just fine 10 years ago, now they're not. What changed? Go ahead and complete this task and then check back here.
Pause now.
You should have marked claim D, and here's an exemplar response explaining why that is. Go ahead and read it over and compare it to your own.
And here's the multiple choice. Go ahead and complete it, pausing now. Great, here's the answers. Go ahead and check them, pausing now. At the end of the unit, there is an optional engineering task where students work to solve the problem of how to automatically cut back plants that grow really quickly. Students begin by reading the book Biomimicry Handbook, which gives examples of inventions that were inspired by plants and animals in nature.
Students read the book Cockroach Robots and see an example of how engineers have been inspired by cockroaches to create a robot. Students get inspiration from giraffes to solve the problem of how to trim a large number of plants that keep growing and growing. Students experiment with a pretend robo-grazer robot that they will make. They try out variables such as the length of the neck and the types of teeth. Then they go on the computer and test out their designs on the robo-grazer simulator. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the end of the unit assessment to see what we can expect students to be able to do by the end of the unit. Now here's a question for Progress Build 1. Please complete it and then check back here. You could have chosen any of these traits, such as having two eyes on the top of its head, speckled appearance, a horizontal rear fin, or a flat shape. And here's the explanation for how that helps the animal survive. Here's an assessment question for Progress Build 2. You should have chosen option D. A polar bear with brown fur would not blend into the snow, so it would be much harder to sneak up on and catch its prey. That's why polar bears are white. If they were brown, it would be more difficult for them to hunt. And finally, please complete question 9, which assesses Progress Build 3. The answers are B and C. These were two effects that were caused by the black carp coming into river habitats. As you can see, this is a rather complex question that expects students to understand the relationships between animals within an environment as an environment changes.
All right, that's it for the unit internalization video. Thank you so much for taking the time to be as prepared as possible for your students. For KIPP teachers, please complete these additional steps to prepare yourself to teach the unit well, and I recommend it for everyone else as well. Thank you very much.